Hi, Allison here with Fibromyalgia, and today I wanted to tell you my journey to diagnosis. It's kind of a big deal because a diagnosis of fibromyalgia can take an average of 6 months. A lot of people takes longer. I was extremely fortunate in that my diagnosis only took about 2 months, but I was on a very direct road to it. So, to give a little bit of the backstory, with fibromyalgia, in the past several years, there have been tests developed. I honestly don't know how much they're used these days. I know someone who is given a fibro test, um, but I believe that it's still mainly a diagnosis of exclusion, which means you get tested for a whole bunch of stuff. And if it's not any of that, and if you have a few other things, then they give you the fibro diagnosis. But there are a lot of things that can look like fibromyalgia. So it's important that they look for any sort of underlying reason that you'd be having these symptoms. So the backstory to my journey starts in my early 20s when I was waiting tables. And I was cutting up with someone and she, squeezed my upper arm, sweet gesture, not being mean or anything like that. And I remember thinking it hurt. And that was very strange, but I just sort of shrugged it off. And I don't know that it would stand out in my mind now, so many years later, if I didn't have the diagnosis I now have. Then, when my husband and I were trying to get pregnant with our first child, we had started at the beginning of the month. And we're like, okay, this month we're going to start trying. And all of a sudden, I came down with these weird muscle pains. Like, it felt like I had started CrossFit boot camp the day before. My whole body hurt. Just that, like you've worked every muscle group in your body kind of muscle pain. And I just thought it was weird. I let it go for 3 days and decided it was very strange at that point. And I think I might have had some like cold or allergy symptoms, some sort of nasal stuff. So I decided to go ahead and go to the doctor. And this to this day still flabbergasts me. I figured every time you went to the doctor when you're of childbearing years, they run a pregnancy test. And I guess they didn't run a pregnancy test on me that day. But I went in and I said, look, I've got these muscle pains. It's out of nowhere. I haven't been working out. I have no reason to have all this pain. I'm not doing anything different. So they're, running different tests on me, checking for illness. And I even said, hey, I'm trying to get pregnant. Could this be a pregnancy symptom? And I was told no. So went home, just sort of wrote it off. They ended up saying it was just a virus, just some virus, didn't know a name or anything like that. Just a virus, it causes muscle pain. Okay. Well, I found out a few days later that I was in fact pregnant. And I now know, or believe, I should say, that pregnancy, getting pregnant, that influx of hormones, because you've got like 100 times more hormones in your body when you're pregnant. I really think for me, that was the trigger to go to full-blown fibromyalgia. I think I was given the fact that I'd had some symptoms in my early 20s, and then I was 24, 25 when I got pregnant. I really do believe that set off the big boom of fibromyalgia. I have noticed since then that my pain is tied to my hormones, so that makes sense. But at the time, I did not know that. And over the next couple of years, I would get that random virus that was nothing but muscle pain, like every 3 or 4 months. And I got to the point where I was like, I'm not even going to the doctor. It's just that virus. It's whatever. I've got a little virus. It's nothing. Then I had my second son. And it was when he was probably 5 or 6 months old, I started noticing that I felt bruised. And the way I described it when I finally went to the doctor was it felt like someone had hit me around the rib cage. So it's all right around here is my sensitive area, and especially on my upper back. I said, it feels like someone hit me with a baseball bat. There's no visible bruise. I have not had any accidents. I haven't, bumped into anything. There's no reason for the pain. So she started asking me some other things and, about fatigue. And I thought, well, I have 2 small children. I have a baby and a toddler. Of course I'm tired. I didn't think anything of it. So she started putting the pieces together. And here's where I'm extremely fortunate. This was a PA, a physician's assistant at my normal doctor's office. And she said, well, Allison, I think it's possible that you might have fibromyalgia. It's a pain condition, and you'll need to go to a rheumatologist. She had tested me for rheumatoid arthritis. She's like, we're going to test you for a few things. So she tested me for lupus. She tested me for rheumatoid arthritis, which my grandmother had. And my cousin's daughter actually was diagnosed with juvenile RA a few years ago. So it definitely runs in the family, and she wanted to make sure it wasn't that. My first RA factor test came back slightly positive, but it's known apparently for having false positives. So she ran another one. It came back negative for lupus. So she sends me off to a rheumatologist, and I, again, super lucky. Number one, that a PA at my normal doctor's office within one visit started to think maybe it could be fibro. Then she sent me to a fabulous rheumatologist. Now, in the meantime, I have to tell this side funny story. I looked up fibromyalgia and I started learning about it, and that it is still, or it was at that time and still to some extent today, sort of written off. People will fluff it off, like a guy I ran into in Walmart one day, and he's like, oh, everybody's got that. When they don't know what else to call it, that's what they, And in its early years, when people started noticing it, a lot of doctors believed it was just a woman thing. It's just a woman being hysterical. It's all in your head. It's nothing. It doesn't actually exist. Get over it. So knowing that about it, I told my husband that the doctor thought I might have something called fibromyalgia. And he says, oh, isn't that a woman thing? Heat, flames, lighting. I'm sorry, what? And he said, yeah, doesn't that have to do with your ovaries or something? John, that's fibroids, not fibromyalgia. So after I got past the confusion point, I went on to explain, muscle pain, fatigue, symptoms. Okay. So I start going to the rheumatologist. I tested again for lupus, a more serious rheumatoid arthritis test that came back negative. Yes. At one point, and over the time, even after he said, yeah, I really think it's fibromyalgia, he did the tender point test. And I will say what's weird about my tender points is you're supposed to feel the pain as soon as you're touched. I tend to not necessarily hurt while it's being pressed, but once the pressure is released, I will ache for several minutes in that spot after that. So, he had pretty much come to the conclusion it was fibromyalgia, but he's really good and very thorough. So every time I went back, he would think of something else. Let's test it. Could it be Lyme disease? Could it be this? Could it be that? I was actually tested for scleroderma at one point. Scleroderma is something that, if you're not familiar, it is kind of scary. Basically, your body starts hardening up. And your skin gets hard, but your internal organs will harden up, and it's fatal. It's not good. So because of how firm my skin is, he thought I might have scleroderma. That came back negative, thankfully. So he said, I'm just lucky and I won't wrinkle as much. But I did get the diagnosis fairly quickly because I was fortunate enough to stumble upon people who were familiar with it and understood it. My rheumatologist told me one of the first visits, he said, there's a bit of a debate in the medical industry about, is fibromyalgia a sleeping disorder, or is your sleep impaired because of the fibro? So the two kind of go hand in hand. You don't really sleep well, so you end up with pain, but you're in pain, so you don't necessarily sleep well. So it's a chicken and the egg kind of thing from what he told me. So in the course of about 2 or 3 months, I was fully diagnosed with fibromyalgia. And over the course of my first year going to the rheumatologist, as we talked about different options and things like that, he also ended up diagnosing me with chronic fatigue syndrome. And I ended up being put on Ambien about the same time as my diagnosis because I was also having the severe sleep issues, not just from the fibromyalgia and the chronic fatigue, but being a new mother. I can't remember what it's called, but there's some sleep disorder that new moms have. So I ended up, when my second baby was about 10 months old and sleeping through the night, I had to be put on Ambien to retrain my body to sleep through the night. So I've been through a lot with sleep stuff. But that is how I came to my diagnosis. And like I said, I'm extremely fortunate. There are people who suffer for years before stumbling upon someone who recognizes it and can help them. So it's a big deal to get the diagnosis, the tender points, fatigue in all 4 quadrants of the body for at least 6 months. Did I say tender points? Tender points, fatigue, and muscle pain. Joint pain is more of a chronic fatigue thing. So I think that's where I ended up with that diagnosis, because I'd also been having some joint pain. And that, like I said, that's CFS or ME. So if you know someone who's in the process of being diagnosed, just know it's a drawn out process, and it's a big deal, and they could be facing people who don't believe in it. They could be facing doctors who just aren't very educated on it. So the diagnosis journey for each person is different, and it can be really difficult and really heartbreaking. But getting the diagnosis is a big deal. It's really hard when you're being tested for 100 things and everything, all your tests come back saying you're fine. You don't have this, you don't have that, you don't have any autoimmunes, you're fine. There is no reason for you to be hurting. That's really kind of frustrating. So when you finally have someone who listens and says, you've got the tender points, you've got the fatigue, you've got the 4 quadrants of pain for a long period of time, you do have something real. You have something that's causing you pain. You're not imagining it. It's not in your head. The diagnosis journey is important. So keep strong, my fibro friends, and be supportive of those fibro friends you've got. And I will see you later.